What's up, guys? Dave with Miracle Canine Training. We're going to be getting started with this week's Q&A show. So, first question here is from Lexi Holo. What are good ways to socialize, walk my anxious dog without risking anyone's safety, including his own? We know his triggers and have been shown ways to help him through a situation, but it's impossible to get his attention when something has him triggered. We were told we need to make his world bigger than his own backyard. I know his ability to follow commands is important, but he gets carried away. He is also very sensitive for a shepherd, so I worry about trying to use an e-collar. So there's a lot of dynamics to this, so let's start to break this down a little bit. So first off, the initial question of good ways to socialize / walk your anxious dog without risking safety. The question I think that you're asking here is, how do I walk my dog without him freaking out, right? Because that's the start of things. Obviously, if you're trying to socialize him on the walk, you need to stop doing that immediately. That's gonna inhibit your ability to get the dog to settle down. And also the walk is never an appropriate place to socialize your dog due to the restraint involved in the leash. So let's first and foremost separate socialize and separate walk. The walk is not for socialization, the socialization is not for walking, right? If we look at this as what are good ways to walk your anxious dog without risking anybody's safety, first and foremost, from the safety side of things, you need to make sure you're giving yourself adequate space when you're passing people or dogs. Obviously, it doesn't say here what the specific trigger is, whether it's people or dogs, but whichever one that is, you need to be making sure that as you're walking past those triggers, you're creating enough space where the rule of thumb that I follow is if both dogs were to lunge at each other, you need to factor in how long is this leash, how long is this leash, and make sure that they can't get all the way to each other. So that means if the other dog is on a flexi lead and has a 20-foot range and your dog's on a 6-foot leash, 26 feet needs to be in between you and that other dog in that situation. That's how we do it safely, is we just make sure we're far enough away from the triggers as we're working through this kind of stuff. And obviously making sure, like we said, we're not socializing with other dogs, we're not letting people come up and pet. Those are key factors with any dog, not just anxious dogs, right? Getting into the second part of the question, we know his triggers and have been shown ways to help him through a situation, but it's impossible to get his attention when something has him triggered. That comes down to the communication that you have or do not have established with the dog, right? We need to make sure that when we're teaching everything, that we are putting in place layers of communication to make sure that we're getting past these issues appropriately, right? So that means when I teach healing, right, I'm teaching it first with a leash, then I'm teaching it with an e-collar, then I'm putting it all on verbal to make sure that when I give the verbal command, I can bounce back to those other means of communication that I've already established to enforce that position. If I've taught it with an e-collar and I give a verbal command and he gets distracted and leaves that heel position to try to go towards a dog or whatever it may be, I could use that e-collar to correct firmly for that to get him to come back into position because I've taught that communication. And this is a big missing link. A lot of people think that just because the dog is, smooth on verbal with something, that they don't need to go about and do all of those steps. That's why when we get dogs in for training, we start from square one, no matter how good the dog is with their training, to make sure that each forms of communication leading up to them being reliable on verbal is where it needs to be. So that part of the equation is a training issue. We were told he needs to make his world bigger than his own backyard. Very true. I tell my clients very frequently that the only way that you get your dog properly environmentally socialized is by getting them out to new places. Most dogs in their lifetime never leave their house or never leave the block around their house. They don't go to parks, they don't go to new neighborhoods, they don't go to new places, and because of that, they start to freak out anytime they see any new thing. So yes, that's also a proper thing. Now, the last part, this is the key to this question, right? I know his ability to follow commands is important, but he gets carried away. He's also very sensitive for a shepherd, so I worry about trying to use an e-collar. Now, we'll see time and time again that owners will say that exact same thing. Oh, but my dog is sensitive, or oh, but my dog is already skittish or fearful or whatever it may be, so I don't want to use an e-collar because I think it's going to make it worse. As opposed to looking at it, if you have a sensitive dog, it should be so easy to redirect these things, right? Sensitive dogs take direction very, very quickly and very, very well when it's given to them in an appropriate way. And if you have a sensitive shepherd, first and foremost, our goal needs to be to to get the dog to follow direction and get the dog to follow command. If they're sensitive, that means we could use less pressure. We could use less force involved to be able to get them to do those things. So you could work through the process very, very quickly. So I think the problems here that you're dealing with is, one, you're trying to combine the socialization and the walking. You need to separate those two. Socialization, you shouldn't even be worried about right now until you have control over the dog. If I have a dog that's anxious or fearful or bad with other dogs or people, I'm never gonna start the socialization process until I know I could first control my dog around those triggers. So forget about that for a little bit. We'll address that at a later time. We have plenty of videos on how to socialize your dog when you're at this point. Right now, you need to be teaching the walk. You need to be teaching your foundational obedience in a way where you have communication established to get the dog to do it when they start getting distracted. Freaking out or darting away or darting toward things, no matter how scared or anxious your dog is never a healthy or appropriate means of working through their stress. And we need to teach them to focus on us instead. And if your dog is sensitive, the e-collar is going to be the perfect tool for it, because you're going to be able to communicate in a gentle fashion with it in a way that the dog really understands. We have tons of videos on teaching the walking, the recalls, downstays, stuff like that with the e-collar. In most of this stuff you can do at home on your own, or you can find an e-collar trainer to help you with the process. But this should be a pretty straightforward process, and I think that breaking down your question in that way gets to the root of the problem, which is the socialization, the walking, the proper communication established, and making sure that you are jumping into using an e-collar, because it's going to help you dramatically with these problems. Hope that helps. If you have any follow-up on questions on this, hit us up in the next Q&A and we'll be happy to answer those further.